Okay, building your neutral row. So at this point, I'm going to assume that you've painted all your chips for the neutral colors, starting out with like chip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or so for the first row, 8 through 14 or 15 for the second row, and so on. You got 5 rows of at least 6 or 7 choices for each value step that you're trying to do. And then you have in front of you, yours will be arranged in from light to dark. And I'm just using old scraps from leftover semesters here. So this is kind of one of the reasons why you want to have it numbered. So that way if it did come out of order for you, you could just turn it over, see what number it was in sequence, and know if you're looking for something that's darker than chip number 12, then you can go find, look for numbers that were higher than 12 at that point. All right, so we're trying to get from slightly lighter than black. So like that chip is too dark. It's darker than our mounting board. So we can see that when there's not a glare on it, you can see how dark it is. We don't want to go that dark. At that point, almost every color becomes black, and it's hard to discern any difference at all. So we want to go just light enough that we can still start to see a hue and be able to identify a hue. And that's probably still pretty dark. But this is not bad. These two are along the same value of dark. Don't really have many dark options here. So if I show you those without the glare, let's see if turning out this light helps at all. Alright, so you can see that it's slightly lighter than the background, and that's what you're looking for. And that'll be your dark color. So something that you can, from 8 feet away, you can see this edge around it in black and tell that it's a completely different shade. Where from 8 feet away, you'll have a hard time seeing that edge. And that's assuming you have one eye closed and you're squinting or something, where your vision's not as keen as it normally is. So this is too dark, this one's too dark, that one's okay. So you can go somewhere within these range. That's what you're looking for. Also, you want to make sure all your chips are covered completely, and try not to have touch up. So you want to get it done in one go, because trying to match that same shade again is more time than it's worth. So you'll have to do that in terms of trying to fine tune your chart later, try to mix up a color, but you don't want to do that for swatches. Save that effort for when you're further down in the line in the chart and about to finish it up. So make sure everything's evenly covered, nice and thickly covered. There are no little white dots. You don't see, it's not a big mess. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use like your palette knife. Texture is okay. You can have texture, but it should be all the exact same color. Not here where you can see it's a lighter gray and a darker gray. All right, so that's 2 different values on one chip. So anything like that, just pull those out. You don't want to use them. Just pick your best chips. And all you're doing to start with is pick any kind of a dark gray, and choose that and just commit to it. So, okay, that's going to be my dark gray. If you decide later you don't want to go that dark, you want to make it slightly lighter, you can go back and change it out, but that'll change the rest of your chart. So for now, I'm going to leave these 2 options as it's either going to be that really dark one or just slightly lighter. Then I'm looking for the top chip. So that's going to be the light value. This one says it's a number 1. This says it's a number 3. Here's a number 4. So you can see how these are slightly getting darker. Here's a 0. So 0 means that's pure white. So it should not be as bright as white. It should be slightly darker. So pull those into the shade. You can see that this chip is slightly darker than that one. It's a very light gray. And this one gets darker. And that one gets darker. So if you see that in the shade, you can tell that darkest, lighter, lighter, lightest. So we don't want to go that light. So any one of these is a good contender for the next spot. This is going to be the value that's going to match your yellow straight out of the tube. And so that's how you'll test that color out. But for now, I'm just showing you it's going to be a light color at the top. And then quickly, I'm just going to pick something that looks slightly darker, darker again, and then something that's brighter than the bottom chip that you want to have. So if I go with this chip, that one's definitely brighter. But if I go with that chip, it's not that much brighter. Maybe I'd have to change over to that. And have, so if I took out the really dark and used that as my dark, and that as my light. So you're looking for 5 steps. And you're trying to get these steps as even as possible. And in order to judge them, you need to leave no gap in between them. So when you look at them, there should be no gap. You don't want to see any of the black. So sometimes if you want to just overlap them a little bit when you're judging them to get rid of any kind of shadow, just overlap it a little bit. That way you get edge against edge and get it in some decent lighting. And what you want to have the illusion of is that this is like a white sheet of paper that's going from here to here, and this is a black sheet of paper, and they're both transparent and they're overlaying each other. So you can kind of see through it, or like layers of fog in darkness coming through. And you want to judge these things by placing, so first that middle value, these 3 chips, edge to edge like that. And at this point you want to ask yourself the question, does it look, can you see the 2 overlaid tissue sheets of paper? So it's a black sheet of paper and a white sheet of paper, and where they overlap, does that look like the right type of gray? If the gray is too light, it's going to always kind of group up with the lighter side. So it feels like there's a big block here and then a dark bottom. If the gray is too dark, then it's going to do the same effect but reverse. It's going to be a block down here and then a light top. What you want is that middle ground where it equally wants to connect with the top as it does with the bottom. So is this chip that? I don't know yet, so we have to compare it. We have to try out different things. So let's find something that's just slightly darker than this. Alright, let's try that. That seems like a better match to me than this. So this one is a little, in my opinion, is a little too light. Still wants to group with the top more. So you see that? It's a little light, but if I swap this one out and put that like that, I can equally see it as a white grouping, and I can equally see it as a black grouping. So this is a much better middle value than what I had before. So I'll swap it out. And that's the kind of judgment and testing you want to do each time to find each position. So I just found this one using this and this. So now I want to find this one. So I'll just take these three, set those two aside. Now I want to try that same idea. Let me switch this edge. Does it look like it groups equally here as much as it groups down here? And this one's not doing that bad. I kind of get a good grouping going both ways. But you can't know for sure until you compare it to other options. So let's swap this one out. Try that. Let's get that out of there. Alright, so this one definitely groups more with the top. So, no. Try this one. Definitely groups more with the bottom. So, no. So if this was chip 13, and this one was like 11, and this one was 15, I could still try 12 and 14. So that's why you want a big range of chips to choose from. The more you have to choose from, the better. If you don't have that chip that works, then choose the best chip you have and put it in place. And if it's still off, then you go back to your paints, remix a new chip, but this time you try to match this color directly. You don't need to start making a bunch of chips anymore. You just try to mix up a gray that looks like this, and you keep a little batch of paint, paint out a chip that's, you can get to this again to see it's going to dry lighter or darker. Let it dry, compare it to this chip, see if it's lighter or darker, and then adjust it from there. So if it's dried up lighter than this chip, then you add a little bit more black to it and get something darker, paint out another chip, let that dry. So have a hair dryer to help the chips dry faster, and make like 3 or 4 more chips that are just slight, small, subtle changes in those chips, and you can fine tune it to get it just right. And remember, that very first chip that you're painting is your yellow chip. So straight out the tube, yellow. Now, some of you are going to have a difference of straight out the tube yellow, and it can be a big range with what kind, depending on what type of yellow you got, and secondly, how many coats of yellow you put on it. So I would suggest you do at least 2 coats of yellow, because if you just do 1 coat of yellow, it tends to be really bright like this, because yellow is very transparent, and what you're seeing is the idea, just like those Renaissance paintings. You have the white background that's showing through a thin layer of yellow, and it comes out a very bright lemon yellow. But you want the paint to be pretty thick. Now, it's okay to use a light yellow like this, just as long as it's well covered and you did it, you got every part of it covered with 1 coat of paint. Otherwise, if you do a second coat, it's likely to get a little bit darker, and make sure you have good coverage. But whatever your yellow out the tube is that you decide, that's what's going to match this top value. So if you see that pure white and the yellow, white is still obviously brighter than yellow. So it's not pure white that yellow is the same value as. It's going to be something that's just slightly darker than white, yet still on its own appears to be white until you have it next to a white. So here it's kind of hard to see with all this glare and lighting. So you'll have to look at it in person with your own experience. So I can kind of get some shade on there, and you can see how much brighter that white is compared to even that chip. But it's going to be one of these darker chips that's going to match with that value of yellow. And what you're looking for is this edge. So when you step back, and you might need some masking tape when you're testing these, you tape your chip down so it's nice and flat. And you have to put them up vertically on your wall. You can't look at them flat the way I'm doing here. There's too much light shining down on the chips. They need to be taped to a surface like this, and then look at it from this point of view, looking at it. So that way you get minimal glare, minimal light on it, and you just see color. And you get those edges flat next to each other. And what you want is to steady this edge, close one eye, and look at that edge and let your eye adjust on it. And if it starts to blur together, then you're very close in value. If you see a very clean, distinct line, like this, there's a very clear, obvious line that no matter how much you stare at it, is not really going to blur together. Then those are values that are separate far enough they're like more than a step apart, or more than a half step apart. So you're looking for that point where the vision starts to get blurry. And it's going to be the hardest on these really bright rainbow-like colors. But as you get into darker yellows, like say this, and you can test it against the edge. See, that's a very strong edge. But as we get down to here, and we're testing it against these edges, you can see how that, if you were 8 feet away, it would start to be a blurry edge. You can squint at it and it just goes from gray into yellow without looking, looks like one rectangle. So it no longer looks like two different chips, because these are very near in value. You go down to the next one, there's back to that strong edge. So that's what you're looking for, is that soft edge when you're trying to value match. So remember, you're setting up a condition of 3 when you're trying to value step. And you're trying to say, put the two ends on one side and you're trying to find the middle. That's value stepping. Value matching, you want the edge to disappear. So you just use 2 pieces, and you can put another yellow over here. So if I had, let's say, tiles 7 and 8, and I want to test it against this gray to see which one's closer, you look at them and you think, which one has the least strong edge when you squint at it from 8 feet away? And you want to get rid of that black gap. So if you see a black gap, overlap it like that. And make sure it's flat, that you don't have shadows. Shadows will affect how you see it. You really want pure color touching pure color. So try to set up those circumstances as best as you can. And then look for which one has the edge that becomes softer through one eye when you're squinting at it from like 8 feet away. And then that's how you match values.